Okay, so while they were at it, they completed the north and south wing expansions in 1859, and they said, you know what, we might as well work on the dome too. That now that the building is significantly longer, the that modest dome design in the center is feeling a little bit insubstantial. And so they want to go with something that kind of fits the grandeur that is developing, so to speak. And so they go looking for the type of design that will fit with the theme that they already have going, that it was originally based on the original design, and serve the purpose as well. They want to have a much taller dome. And so the new one is going to end up being 287 feet tall, and they're going to, some people are going to, cheekily call it a wedding cake design, because you imagine wedding cake layers. But they're going to base it on St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, which was designed by Michelangelo. So, as far as the heritage of the design, it's kind of hard to go wrong, but it does, serve the purpose. It, has columns and it has these vertical lines going up. So the theme-wise, it fits because you see the bottom of the building here. It has a similar rectangular design with the triangle in the center, and a little bit more flourish to some of the columns, and a lot more statues along the top. But overall, it actually fits well with the structure, and so they're going to begin construction. But as with the Washington Monument, things were fine until the Civil War happened, and then they're going to have to let it sit for a bit. 1861, the unfinished dome is sitting there surrounded by scaffolding, and they're going to have to pause. Not completely. They want to get it done, but they are going to have to take a pause with the construction. Actually, during the war, it temporarily housed some Union soldiers who were put there to protect it in case there was a Confederate attack. Remember, Washington, D.C. was chosen because it was closer to the South originally, and so that made it a bit more vulnerable to Confederate attacks, just because it wasn't, say, New York City, and it was much, much closer to the South itself, and so that was a worry. And so, there's soldiers that are being housed there, and it's not the most exciting assignment for the soldiers to be housed there. So the story goes that they spent some of their time there holding mock congressional sessions, using the official stationery that was in the house. And so you can imagine, I wish we had videos of those sessions, because I'm sure they would be quite hilarious. But we don't. We have to imagine it. But that would have been a good time, I'm sure, for that group. But despite the war, Lincoln does want construction to continue, and after a pause, they do get it going again, and they're going to make it work and get it on its feet. So here's the final design, and you can see that the grounds are still a bit of a mess. We'll get to that in just a second. But here is the finalized version, which is there's been updates since, but the general structure is what we have today. I like this particular image. It's a nice detail of the elements that go into this particular structure, but going back to St. Peter's Basilica, they did take a lot of the design elements. You have the columns with the little windows in between, the vertical lines. They increased the number of vertical lines. They made them kind of thinner or closer together going up, but it fits overall. And then they have the sort of the piece at the top that also has columns, and then on top they have the statue there. So it all, seem to work well together. So it's amazing, you can add on to a building over time and it actually still come out looking like something that was meant from the beginning. So the grounds themselves needed work after all this was done. Construction is rough on the ground, so they waited and then got the grounds finished, and that was designed by Frederick Olmsted, the same guy who did Central Park in New York, the one that we mentioned previously, working with who will work with the Chicago World's Fair. And so quite famous designer, has a hand on so many public projects in the United States in the 1800s. So it's a character worth knowing about just because you still see his work today. So that was 58 acres originally. Now the grounds of the U.S. Capitol cover some 270 acres. I wanted to point you to a couple of aspects that are worth knowing about. The main thing that you see when you walk into the Capitol is the rotunda. That's always in any major public building. That's going to be the showpiece, and the design of it is interesting in itself. So this piece here, the ceiling fresco, was completed by Brumidi. I admit I don't know Brumidi myself, but I do know that he spent a good 11 months suspended in the air about 180 feet off the ground to complete it. So, bravo to him for surviving that. But this is essentially George Washington centered here, and it's essentially surrounded by sort of mythology. It's Greek and Roman gods and goddesses, and of the 1800s, this fits. I don't think if we were going about doing a fresco in modern times, this is the direction that we would go, but at the time it worked. But the more interesting of the designs that are in this upper section, if we jump down a little bit, so the fresco would be up here in the very top of the dome, but this ring that goes along the outside, or along right below the windows, this is like an upper walkway, and then here is a frieze. I think that's how it's pronounced. I'm not much of an expert in art, but this is a painting that is done in such a way that it looks like a relief carving. So if you've carved a rock so that you have a three-dimensional image there, that's the way that this is painted. And it's neat because it tells the history of the U.S. up to basically the end of the 1800s. So the sequence here, let me bring it up. It's a sort of a circular story, so to speak. So this image here, I have to make sure I tell you correctly, is the figure of America with some allegorical figures kind of starting out at the very beginning. And then you move to Columbus's landing in the Americas. There it goes. So you see the boat and the classical design there. Native Americans receiving them, and then colonization. So people in colonial garb, using a lot of hand power and muscle power to build out the colonial world. Then the reading of the Declaration of Independence. California Gold Rush. And then the Civil War ending in peace. So the two sides, they are shaking hands. And then man's first flight. So this was obviously completed at the very beginning of the 20th century, but the the plans there were in the works over time. How to decorate the insides of the dome that got completed. It took a while, but and then it starts over here again. So it's kind of a circular story, but it's neat to see. I like that. That's a much more useful type of thing to see there. So this would be, the rotunda itself is a place of honor if the president, a president often will, if they die, they might lie in state in the rotunda, depending on the situation. And things change there. It's a sort of a working monument, and it also changes with the political and social winds of the time. So the statues that are chosen to be in the rotunda can change. That's an area that you see places of honor going to certain individuals, and that has been added to and altered over time. And so you get characters like Lincoln. Martin Luther King Jr., I believe, is still in the rotunda, but that was obviously would have been added after his passing. Things as the United States evolves in its kind of understanding of itself, the rotunda becomes the focus. And then there's lots and lots of other statues. There's a statuary hall where there's just statue after statue after statue that help you see the sort of a history of important folks there. And so it's terribly interesting. And like I say, every aspect of the building itself has a story attached to it. So I've got a series of videos here that you can take part in. Most of them are relatively short. This is actually just a website for the architect of the Capitol. So there's a single person who's officially the architect of the Capitol, and a whole team of people who work for that person, because it takes quite a team to maintain and conserve and improve over time the function of the building. And so that office is a mixture of history and engineering and architecture, and it's really, really interesting. So if you get a chance, click on that link, and you'll see, get to explore their website. They actually have a good YouTube channel as well, and I've got a couple of links here, I believe, from the architect of the Capitol office, and they just put out great information because they serve the public, because they serve the Capitol itself, which is a unique position. If you're a student of architecture, that would be a great goal, is to work for that office. This is a quick history. I think it's like 5 minutes. It's from the same office, and basically it's a voiceover with a 3D model that grows over time so that you can visually understand how the Capitol has developed. So that's very useful. This is like a 90-second video about the Senate chamber, just to give you a little sense of how it functions. This is a longer documentary, so if you have the time, spend some time with it a little bit. It's just gives you a much more detailed and leisurely exploration of the Capitol. And this is about art in the rotunda and its importance, and then Statuary Hall, which I mentioned a second ago. And sometimes it's instructive to see what goes into keeping a place like this nice. And so in the early 2000s, the dome was in need of restoration. Many cracks had developed in its structure, as large buildings tend to do, and so it was in need of restoration. So they undergo a massive restoration project. And so this is a video that was done at the end of that restoration, and the leader of the project takes you through that process and what was done, and you actually get to see some really great views from the top of the Capitol. And so that's worth your time as well. So spend some time there. And so next, we'll come back and talk about the Statue of Liberty.